Welcome to Contingency Management for Stimulant Use Disorders, presented by the University of Vermont Center on Rural Addiction. This course will introduce you to contingency management, a highly effective type of behavioral therapy that is currently the most effective treatment for patients struggling with stimulant drug use, such as cocaine and methamphetamine. Rates of stimulant abuse and stimulant-related overdoses are rising dramatically, especially in rural communities. While overdose deaths have generally been higher in urban areas, rates have been increasing in rural counties faster than in urban counties. Click Start to begin.
I've been using cocaine and methamphetamine for about 10 years, on and off. I've thought about getting off stimulants in the past, but I just couldn't commit. Now I'm pregnant and I know it's not good for the baby, or me. I'm ready to make a change.
I started taking stimulants before my eldest kid was born. That's going on 17 years. I want a better relationship with them, with my family, and I've tried to give up before, but it's never stuck. Living so far out of town makes getting regular treatment hard.
It took me 20 years of relapsing on opioids to ask for help and to start my recovery with buprenorphine. The good news is that a year and a half later, I haven't touched heroin, but it's been much harder to stop taking stimulants.
Stimulant use disorder is a developing crisis with an increasing public health burden. The situation is especially urgent in rural areas throughout the country. More specifically, when looking at overdoses, including stimulants such as methamphetamine, rates are now higher among rural counties than urban counties. Unlike opioid use disorder, there is no medication treatment for patients struggling with the use of stimulants, including cocaine and methamphetamine. The most effective treatment available for patients with stimulant use disorder is behavioral therapy and, in particular, contingency management. The goal of this course is to explain what contingency management is, why it works, and how to use this evidence-based approach. At the end of this course, you should be able to 1. Describe why providers should consider using contingency management for treatment of stimulant use disorder. 2. Provide the evidence that supports contingency management for treating stimulant use disorder and educate patients on the essential elements. 3. Define the steps needed for implementation with a particular focus on using contingency management with patients in rural areas. Additional resources are available through the University of Vermont Center on Rural Addiction. So, let's get started. Snorted, injected, or taken orally, the illicit use of stimulants including cocaine, methamphetamine, and medications such as Ritalin and Adderall is extremely dangerous and can have dire consequences including cognitive impairment and poor memory, elevated rates of psychiatric comorbidity including violence and psychosis, anhedonia, impulsivity, poor judgment, and hypersexuality, poor retention in outpatient treatment and ambivalence about the need to stop, and particularly poorer outcomes in opioid treatment, contraction and transmission of infectious disease including HIV and hepatitis, cardiac disease, stroke, and death. Cheaper and stronger than ever before, stimulants today are having an increasingly deadly impact. According to the CDC, from 2012 through 2018, drug overdose deaths involving cocaine more than tripled, and the rate of deaths involving psychostimulants, including methamphetamine, increased nearly 5 times. In 2018, stimulant-related deaths accounted for about 40% of all overdose deaths in the United States. Methamphetamine use in particular has been a serious public health concern in rural communities of the West and Midwest. Stimulant-related overdose deaths have recently shown dramatic increases in rural communities throughout the United States, with overdose deaths involving psychostimulants higher in rural than urban areas. It is also very important to note that the cocaine and methamphetamine entering the United States in recent years have increasingly contained variable amounts of highly potent opioids such as fentanyl, often without the knowledge of the seller or user. This is particularly true for cocaine supplies, and a very high proportion of overdose deaths attributed to cocaine are actually fatalities caused by fentanyl. In 2018, 45% of all stimulant overdose deaths also involved a synthetic opioid. In the next section, you will learn more about how the increasing use of stimulants is having a particularly negative effect on people with concurrent opioid use disorder. As part of the national response to the opioid crisis, safe and effective medications like buprenorphine and methadone are being used successfully to reduce opioid use and improve the lives of people with opioid use disorder. However, cocaine and methamphetamine use by patients in treatment with buprenorphine and methadone has steadily increased over the past decade. In some areas of the United States, approximately 50% of this patient population show evidence of regular stimulant use. One of the biggest concerns about the impact of stimulant use by patients on buprenorphine or methadone is that stimulant use is one of the strongest predictors of poor opioid treatment outcome. For example, a 2019 study from the University of Washington School of Medicine concluded that the use of stimulants while receiving buprenorphine for opioid use disorder is associated with more than 2 times the risk of dropping out of treatment for opioid use disorder. And when stimulants also contain opioids such as fentanyl, there is the additional immediate risk of opioid-related relapse and possible overdose among those patients as well. Overall, unmanaged stimulant use among patients receiving opioid use disorder treatment stands to undermine the substantial progress that has been made in recent years with treating people with opioid use disorder. Stephen T. Higgins, Ph.D., has been studying contingency management since the early 1990s. The research that he and his colleagues pioneered has not only shown that voucher-based reinforcement therapy is highly effective in reducing substance use, but that it is successful in retaining patients in treatment programs as well. Click on the questions below to meet Stephen Higgins and to hear about his work on contingency management.
I'm Steve Higgins, and I'm a professor of psychiatry and psychological science at the University of Vermont, where I also direct the Vermont Center on Behavior and Health. The treatment research on the treatment of addiction in the late 1980s, and there was an epidemic here in the US, the cocaine epidemic. And it was raging, and it really caught the medical community by surprise. At that time, leading into that, we really didn't understand that cocaine could produce addiction. There were popular songs about how much fun cocaine was, and people got intrigued and began to experiment with it. And it wasn't long after that that some information started to roll in that it wasn't as benign as we thought. And as more people experimented with cocaine, more people found that, in fact, once they started, they were having real difficulties quitting. And the problem for the medical community is we had no idea how to treat it. A range of different counseling, cognitive behavioral therapy, 12-step based counseling, based on the original AA model of addiction, more eclectic counseling, group therapy, individual therapy, residential therapy, virtually everything that was in the toolbox of addiction treatment was tried. And then there were reach out efforts by the National Institute on Drug Abuse to bring expert scientists who had done landmark studies in other areas of science to come in and work on the neuropharmacology and to try and come up with ideas. I'm not exaggerating, with just about every class of medications you could think of that would have some chance of working. None of them worked. And that was back in the late 1980s through the 1990s, and it has continued until now. If you understood the pharmacology of cocaine and how it produces addictive-like behavior, you had which is through the dopamine system, you could make a pretty good guess that it was going to be very hard to develop a medication that was specific enough that it could impact cocaine use, but leave the rest of your functioning pretty normal, and so that you could go about your daily business. And so we anticipated that you probably were better off trying to develop a behavioral intervention. First of all, I did not invent the idea of contingency management. It's a basic tenet of behavioral psychology. And so when we were faced with this challenge of a US cocaine epidemic and knew that medications weren't going to be helpful, we had a thought, how do you get initial abstinence? How can you take somebody who's been using cocaine at an addictive level and help them stop for just to take stock of things initially? So anyhow, we made a guess that if we use contingency management and developed a more sophisticated way of delivering it, which we did around these vouchers that you could exchange for retail items, the concept was you would use financial incentives for the initial 12 weeks, the initial couple months of treatment to help the individual start to experience life without drugs involved, without cocaine involved. So there's a sound scientific basis for contingency management and for understanding how what mechanisms drive addiction by acting as primary unconditioned positive reinforcers. So that's much like food or fluids, water, sex. We don't have to learn that to like those things. And so essentially with contingency management, you're using that same reward system to focus on the desirable behavior of abstaining from drug use. I think it's the case that cocaine is such an effective reinforcer that you have to be very systematic in trying to strengthen the behavior of abstaining from it. But it's only contingency management that systematically builds on those by rewarding when they've made progress in abstaining and withholding the rewards when they've failed to make progress. And that differential rewarding, just like when you're trying to promote healthy behavior in your children or good behavior in the classroom, that systematic delivering and withholding the rewards can help somebody achieve abstinence. And in 2016, we conducted one of those reviews, and we looked back from the seminal study in 1991 on contingency management for cocaine, and there was 176 controlled studies have been done evaluating the effectiveness of contingency management, and 152 of those studies produced statistically significant effects supporting the efficacy of contingency management. And there's nothing else that I could think of other than perhaps the efficacy of opioid substitution medications like buprenorphine or methadone in treating opioid use disorder. Nothing has that kind of consistent efficacy other than contingency management. So if you're faced with treating problems like cocaine or methamphetamine, you should have contingency management in your toolbox, or else you're really operating at a disadvantage.
There are many methods for delivering contingency management, and reinforcers can be delivered in individual settings or in group settings. Reinforcers can be gift cards, clinical privileges, flexibility or convenience, or goods or services that uniquely support a healthy, drug-free lifestyle. What patients earn can be fixed or steadily growing amounts. Common to all successful methods of contingency management is the importance of defining and objectively measuring the target behavior and delivery of an incentive that is important and rewarding to the patient, that is immediately delivered when the target behavior is produced. Next, we'll watch 3 different scenarios with the people we met at the start of this module. Each one has different goals and challenges. All 3 are part of a contingency management program using an escalating incentive which is both popular and well-researched. Each scenario will demonstrate the application of one of the main principles of contingency management. 1. How a target behavior that is to be reinforced is objectively identified. 2. How that target is measured with a plan for the immediate delivery of the incentive when the target behavior is produced. The plan includes the escalation of the incentive for consecutive successful production of the identified behaviors. 3. Conversely, you will see the plan for withholding the incentive and resetting the incentive escalation when the target behavior is not produced. Click on the first scenario to get started. In this scenario, 28-year-old Daniela is speaking to her clinician. She shares that she has been struggling with stimulant misuse for 10 years. She recently found out that she is pregnant and for the health of her baby wants to stop using stimulants. As you watch, notice how the clinician applies the first principle of contingency management, how the target behavior that is to be reinforced is objectively identified. Notice also that an incentive that is important and rewarding to the patient is discussed.
Thanks for telling me a little bit about yourself, Daniela. It's great that you're doing something about changing your cocaine use, especially now that you're pregnant. I want to start by saying that though we don't have any medications to treat stimulant use disorders, there are good options for treatment. We have a very good behavioral treatment with a lot of evidence for success. It's called contingency management.
How does it work?
Like a lot of folks, you probably used to do a lot of different activities that you enjoyed before getting involved with cocaine, like going to dinner with your boyfriend, spending time with your family.
Yeah, I miss spending time with my mom. We used to go shopping, but not anymore.
Those things are sources of positive reinforcement, things that make us feel good. Drugs are very effective in that way too. And the more you get involved in cocaine, the less you probably did healthy activities that you enjoy and instead spent more time using cocaine, recovering from its effects, or hanging out with other friends that drink and use cocaine. So what we find is that we tend to get out of balance in our lives, and over time, cocaine has become your go-to method for blowing off steam, reducing stress, and looking to feel good.
Staying away from cocaine isn't going to be easy. It's just gotten so easy to bump into a friend and end up having a drink and snorting a line or two while we hang out. Probably easier than finding the time and money to do some of the other things that I used to enjoy doing.
You're right. Making a big change like this won't be easy. But we know that incentives work to help you make these important and difficult behavior changes. The key is to give you the support and positive reinforcement you need for your initial efforts to stay away from the cocaine and start forming some new habits.
Okay, so tell me more about these incentives.
So, first, every time you come in and leave a urine sample that tests negative for cocaine use, you immediately earn an incentive.
Is it cash? Because I don't think that's the best thing for me. It can totally be a trigger to use, like how I always seem to end up using on the days that I get my paycheck.
We don't want to set you up by handing you cash, so we use gift cards or vouchers, which you can turn into almost anything you need or want to support all those healthy activities you enjoy, like going out to eat, buying things for your baby, getting a massage or pedicure. All those recreational activities that we talked about that might help you feel good and even unwind, but without all the problems associated with your cocaine use. It might also be things like paying bills or other things that cause you financial stress because, as you know, stress can build up and put you at risk of relapse. Our goal is to start giving you such an improved quality of life that over time it makes it easier and easier to stay away from the drug-induced reinforcement. Does this big picture perspective kind of make sense?
Yes, it does.
49-year-old John has been struggling with stimulants for 18 years, starting with cocaine years ago and now methamphetamine for the past 8 years. John's goal is to build a relationship with his children and find a rewarding job. John lives in rural Vermont without reliable transportation, too far away from the clinic to go frequently in person. He was concerned this would prevent him from taking part in contingency management, but during a telehealth appointment, John's clinician confirms that he can take part remotely. We joined John and his clinician midway through his video appointment. Already, the clinician has explained what contingency management is and how abstinence reinforced by tangible reward is applied. Watch as the clinician explains to John the second principle of contingency management, how the target is measured with a plan for the immediate delivery of the incentive when the target behavior is produced. The plan includes the escalation of the incentive for consecutive successful production of the identified behaviors.
As you and I already talked about, our aim with the incentive system is to create a situation where you're getting straight-up positive reinforcement and rewards for making these hard initial lifestyle changes. Since it can take work to stop old habits that are no longer serving you and instead form new, healthier habits. Now, I want to talk to you about the importance of abstinence. Studies show that the longer you abstain from cocaine, the better your chances of success down the road. It's great to abstain and come in with a negative sample occasionally, but we know that it's even more powerful and bodes well for your long-term success to be able to string together continuous periods of abstinence. It also gives your brain and body a chance to recover from negative effects from the stimulants you've been using over these past few years.
This sounds good and makes sense, but how do I do that? I'm more of a one day at a time kind of guy.
These incentives are strategically designed to support you not only in staying away from stimulants, but then staying abstinent for an extended period. So, for 12 weeks, you'll have a video call every Monday, Friday, where you'll submit a drug test. You'll do this by using an oral swab, which we'll send you. On your video call, you'll open the swab and use it in front of your clinician. Then you'll review the results together. Make sense? Now I'll show you how the incentives process works. This table lays out what you can earn. The first time you come in, if your drug test is negative for methamphetamine and cocaine, then you would earn an incentive worth $6. Then, for every negative sample after that, the incentive goes up by $1. 2 negative drug tests in a row, which is the equivalent of a week of abstinence, you get a $10 bonus. See on the table here? This means that the longer your tests are negative, the more you earn, and even the more each sample is worth over time. You start off low, but if your samples are negative, you can earn up to $50 in 2 weeks, and over 3 months, you could earn a total of $540 worth of vouchers. That's some serious incentives.
And I could use those vouchers for my kids?
Definitely. You can use them to do things all together, like going out to dinner, to the movies, or something that you all enjoy. You can also use the vouchers for vocational training that could help with finding a job that you really like. They can also help to pay some bills or other practical needs, since sometimes it's these kinds of things that can build up and become so aversive and stressful that it sets you up for use even more.
That would be great.
For the past year, 56-year-old Tim has been treated with buprenorphine. He's been given prescriptions for longer and longer durations and required to come to the clinic less frequently, allowing him more flexibility, time for healthy activities, and to strive for his goal of building family time and exercise into his life. Tim has used stimulants in the past, but until recently, he had not used them while on buprenorphine. When he recently tested positive for methamphetamine, Tim's counselor enrolled him in contingency management, and he's been coming to the clinic 2 times a week for 2 weeks for this treatment. All his urine tests have been negative for methamphetamine until today. Watch as the clinician reminds Tim of the third principle of contingency management, the plan for withholding the incentive and resetting the incentive escalation when the target behavior is not produced. The clinician also reminds Tim of the potential for continued methamphetamine use jeopardizing his treatment at the buprenorphine clinic.
I slipped up. I've been using methamphetamines. It has really been a tough week, because I have to use smaller prescriptions for buprenorphine. I have to go to the doctor's office more frequently. I'm disappointed in myself. I was really enjoying the freedom and the feeling of making gains in my life.
Thank you for being so honest, Tim. You're right, this week your sample is positive for methamphetamine, but this is the perfect time to put our heads together and come up with a good game plan. First, let's think through how we can use the incentive system to help get things back on track.
Okay.
I am concerned that your methamphetamine use will undermine your successes at the buprenorphine program. Because there is so much at stake, we want to do all we can to get you back on track and provide you with the support you need. So, if you remember back from the beginning when we talked about the incentive schedule, methamphetamine negative samples will earn incentives, and samples that are positive will not earn any vouchers. However, most people find they struggle and slip up from time to time. So, the incentives are scheduled in a way that can help you get back on track. All you have to do to go back to earning incentives is next time give us a urine sample that tests negative for stimulant use. And let me get the table. Look, the next time you come in and leave a sample that tests negative, you go back to $6 and then $7. 2 negative drug tests in a row, which is the equivalent of a week of abstinence, you get a $10 bonus. So, as soon as you provide 2 negatives in a row, you'll be back on track and earning that value that you were before the slip.
Oh, that's a relief. I thought all that hard work was for nothing. But do I still lose all the incentives that I had banked from the last 3 weeks of abstinence?
No way. You can never lose incentives that you had already earned. For example, you don't have to spend them right away as soon as you receive them. So, you still have any incentives that you had before the slip. It's just that today's positive sample will not earn you any more vouchers until you go back to providing negatives. But once you do, you're back on track and earning like you did before, with every single consecutive negative after that being worth more and more. Overall, I know these changes are not easy, Tim, so we want to help support you and reward all the effort you're making. And we want to help you string those changes together over time. Because the longer you do it, the more it solidifies into a routine and a habit, and the more likely it is to stick.
Let's take a moment to recap. The interactions you just watched between clinician and patient demonstrated how to apply the 3 key elements of contingency management. 1. How a target behavior that is to be reinforced is objectively identified. 2. How that target is measured with a plan for the immediate delivery of the incentive when the target behavior is produced. The plan includes the escalation of the incentive for consecutive successful production of the identified behaviors. 3. The plan for withholding the incentive and resetting the incentive escalation when the target behavior is not produced. Continue on to the next section to apply your learning. There are a number of assumptions that may prevent a clinic or clinician from implementing a contingency management program. Click on each topic below to reveal a common question around contingency management, and then click again to reveal the answer. Consider how you might respond next time you encounter one of the questions below. Staff resistance. Question. Clinic staff may be concerned about the idea of incentives being similar to bribery. Why should my patient get paid for doing something that's not good for them or illegal? I don't get paid for not using cocaine. Answer. The key distinction is contingency management is reinforcing the patient to engage in a behavior that ultimately is beneficial to his or her health as well as public health more generally. Directly addressing staff resistance and providing contingency management training are very important for the success of a program. Funding and training. Question. Many clinics or providers will not have the resources or money available to support the incentives, money, gift cards, etc., being used to reinforce behavior change. Answer. While most of the studies on contingency management have used monetary incentives like gift cards or vouchers exchangeable for goods and services in the community that support healthy activities, contingency management interventions can also use other types of incentives. Some examples are increased convenience or flexibility, more medication take-homes, more convenient counseling schedules, expanded clinical privileges, or maybe even a special parking spot. Some programs have also used donations from retailers or other organizations in their community, like day passes to movie theaters, gyms, YMCAs, or state parks. Studies have also shown contingency management to be effective when done in the form of deposit contracts with money from family, friends, or the patient herself, as well as when funding is provided by other sources like health departments or local grants. Overall, the most important thing to remember is that the reward needs to be something that is valued and reinforcing to the patient. We all have things that are rewarding to us, but it varies across different people. Sweets for some, while for others it's something salty. This is why gift cards and vouchers are so easy, as the person can spend them on whatever is rewarding to them. But you can also use other types of rewards that may be naturally occurring in your environment. You can come up with a menu of several types of rewards that the patient can select from so that they don't become satiated with one type of incentive over time. Maintenance of long-term gains. Question. Contingency management is powerful while in place, but maintaining longer-term outcomes is harder and often a shortcoming providers point to. Answer. Keep in mind that 4, 8, or 12 weeks of diabetes or hypertension medication is not a magic bullet that is sufficient in curing a patient's underlying medical issue. And like those conditions, addiction is complex, chronic, and relapsing. Perhaps the patient can learn to reconstruct their entire environment and social network in order to remain abstinent, much like other patients can modify their sedentary behavior or dietary intake, but it is often difficult and takes time. Like medications for chronic conditions, contingency management is effective while it's in place and is an effective tool to provide support while the patient is working toward the other, longer-term, critical behavior changes that support sustained success. Patients on medication for opioid use disorder who use psychostimulants. Question. Patients who are stable on methadone or buprenorphine and no longer using opioids but who continue to use cocaine or stimulants should be taken off medication for opioid use disorder. Answer. It is very important that patients are not taken off methadone or buprenorphine. Contingency management is an effective treatment to reduce stimulant use. Even slowly tapering a patient off medication for opioid use disorder may put them at risk for experiencing opioid withdrawal symptoms, relapsing, and overdosing. Contingency management is a very effective psychosocial treatment that is based on scientific evidence shown to increase treatment retention and decrease drug use. It is based on learning principles like positive reinforcement to strengthen a behavior like abstinence from stimulants. When patients are abstinent, they eventually become healthier, their housing situations stabilize, and their relationships improve. It is also important to note that not all communities are the same. You may have questions about how to set up a contingency management program and tailor it for use with different populations. It is important to get training or technical assistance to set up a contingency management program in your practice. SAMHSA funds addiction technology transfer centers that provide trainers and experts who offer technical assistance on setting up contingency management programs. If you would like more information or to review publications or would like to connect with the University of Vermont Center on Rural Addictions for assistance related to implementing evidence-based practices in your own practice or organization, please contact cora@uvm.edu. Our staff and faculty provide support to rural practices across Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, and upstate New York, and nationwide through technical assistance, education, and consultation. Thank you for your attention and for all the work you do.
I was worried at first that the incentive was going to be cash, which is a total trigger, and I would have spent it on drugs. It was a relief when they told me about the amazing voucher incentives. I've been able to get things for the baby, which I wouldn't have been able to afford otherwise.
At first, my biggest motivation to stop using cocaine and start on the incentive program was the money. But then, I started to feel healthier and went back to work. I did things I hadn't done in years, like spending quality time with my family and friends. Staying off cocaine wasn't about the money anymore. It was about doing it for myself and my family. It still is.
Because of my struggle with stimulants, I was nervous they were going to ask me to leave the buprenorphine program, but they didn't. And instead, they referred me to an incentive program, which really provides me the motivation and support that I need. Even when I slip up, they believe in me, and that helps me believe in myself.
You are now ready to complete the course evaluation. There will be 10 questions, and you will need to score at least 80% to pass. You will have unlimited attempts to pass. Read each question carefully, choose the best answer or answers, and then select Submit. Good luck!